Here is everything you need to know about the 2 new mechanics, some interactions to consider, and the handful of returning mechanics that you can find in Aetherdrift. So let's do what you do on the starting line and talk about the first new mechanic, Start Your Engines. Start Your Engines is a new keyword ability that can be found on permanents across the set. When a permanent with Start Your Engines enters under your control, your speed becomes 1. This is something that doesn't use a stack and cannot be responded to by either player. Start Your Engines and speed is similar to Ascend and the City's Blessing. Start Your Engines is the mechanic, like Ascend, and speed is the designation, like the City's Blessing. In short, a designation is something that acts like a marker that other rules and effects can identify. And just like Ascend and the City's Blessing, you cannot lose this designation, even if your opponent removes all of your permanents with Start Your Engines. Once you have 1 or more speed, you get the ability to increase your speed by triggering a certain condition. In this case, whenever an opponent loses life during your turn, you can increase your speed by 1. This ability can only trigger once each turn, and once you hit 4 speed, you're considered to have reached max speed and can't gain any more. It's worth pointing out that this ability acts just like every other triggered ability. It uses a stack, so it can be copied with cards like Stronic Resonator or Virtue of Knowledge, and you can also counter this ability with things like Stifle and Consign to Memory. And if this mechanic makes its way into Modern, be mindful of whose turn you're cracking those fetch lands on. Once you hit max speed, certain abilities effectively become unlocked on certain cards. For example, the Raceway lands. Prior to hitting max speed, they simply tap for colourless mana, but once you do, you're able to use their max speed abilities. There's also cards like Hazarat, Godseeker, and Samut, the Driving Force. They don't specifically have max speed abilities, but they do check to see what your speed is. Remember, speed is simply a marker that other effects can identify. In this case, if you don't have max speed, Hazarat cannot attack or block. Next up, there's Exhaust, perhaps the simplest mechanic we'll see in the whole of 2025. Exhaust abilities are activated abilities that can only be activated once during the entire game, and that's literally all there is to it. One thing to keep in mind, if you use a card like Cloud Shift or Ephemerate on a card that used their Exhaust ability, thanks to rule 400.7, when an object moves from one zone to another, in this case into exile and back to the battlefield, it becomes a new game object with no memory of its previous existence. Meaning, if you flicker an exhausted creature, you can reactivate their exhaust ability again. Moving on to the returning mechanics, it wouldn't be a racing set without some tricked out rides. So of course, crew and vehicles make an appearance. Vehicles are generally non-creature artifacts with the crew ability. At any time, you can activate the crew ability by tapping any number of creatures whose total power is equal to or greater than the number next to the crew ability. Once you do this, the vehicle becomes an artifact creature that can attack or block. Just remember that once the vehicle becomes a creature, they're subjected to the same rules as creatures. So if you played a vehicle and then crewed it, you wouldn't be able to attack with that vehicle straight away thanks to Summoning Sickness. So you'd need a card like Kolodin, Triumph Caster to give them haste. Next, there's Saddle, which only premiered last year in Thunder Junction. Saddle is effectively crew, but for creatures. You could find this mechanic on mostly mounts, but the big difference here is that you can only activate the ability at sorcery speed. And because mounts are already creatures, when you saddle them, they get a bonus ability like the one on Glory Heath Lynx, which, when it attacks while saddled, you can search your library for a basic plains and put it into your hand. The final returning mechanic is a classic: cycling. Very simple, but extremely versatile. Cycling is an activated ability, and cards with cycling will have the keyword followed by a cost. You can cycle at instant speed by simply playing that cost and discarding the card, and when you do, you draw a card. This is an excellent ability that allows you to cash in cards when they're no longer needed during a game. For example, if you had a Bashri Tomorrow's Champion in play and you draw another copy of them, you can simply cycle it away for a new card. Speaking of Bashri, technically Exert is a returning mechanic, but it only features on this card. When a creature uses an ability with Exert, they'll become exerted and they won't untap during your next untap step. But unlike Exhaust, if you use a card like Acrobatic Leap on an exerted creature, there is nothing stopping you from using that Exert ability again. Of course, same situation as before, they'll skip the next untap step. So, what's your favourite mechanic in this set? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to like this video if you learned anything, and subscribe, because if you don't, I'll tell Wizards not to reveal who this person is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.